Hey guys, time once again to get Gubby. We're going to introduce what you need to know about Nigeria, kind of the framework of the whole country, and then we can kind of fill in the blanks. We're going to create these little kind of, we'll look at them like boxes, about 5 things you need to know about Nigeria, and then as we go on for the rest of the lessons, we'll kind of build on our basic understanding of these kind of concepts. Now, I think today might get a little bit confusing just because we're going to talk about lots of things and hopefully you can see some overlaps, but stick with it because the further we get into it, the more you'll understand how these things have to do with each other. Because really, that is, well, here, let me share my screen and then we will discuss that. That's not what I want to share. Right here. Link. Okay. So let's look here, present. Perfect. So what you need to know about Nigeria, there are 5 things that really are the framework of the country. The legacy and the tradition of military rule really does not exist in any of the other countries we look at. So that is pretty unique about Nigeria. And there's some reasons of why the military has played such a major role in the sovereignty of the country, and so we'll talk about that. It's really all of these things overlap. Okay, so they all kind of, if you understand them individually, that's great. But what I want you to ultimately do is be able to explain how these 5 bullet points strengthen each other. Okay, so then you have the idea of ethnic and religious diversity, more so than any other country we're going to talk about. That is possibly the most kind of fundamental thing to understand the country. It explains why it's so difficult to become a democracy. They've been trying and made significant strides, benefiting. And then natural resources, another piece. Nigeria is a country that is rich with oil and that has caused it as many problems as it has benefits. So we'll discuss that. And then the impact of religion, particularly Islam, on democracy in parts of the country. So kind of end with posing this question: what is a coinciding cleavage? And a coinciding cleavage is multiple divisions that exasperate each other, make divisions worse. So when you have one division that coincides with another, right, makes the country worse, drives the country further apart. That's really Nigeria is a case study in coinciding cleavages. Okay, so we're first going to look at the idea of civilian versus kind of military rule. Well, let's look at this next piece here. Since 1960, okay, when Nigeria actually declared its independence, we'll get back at this in a second, it has been a mix of democratic systems, regimes, and military dictatorships. And so we're going to try to figure out why that is. So what we need to do is we need to go back and look at the role of the British in Nigeria, specifically just kind of Europeans in Africa in general. Their goal was 2 things: to create a colony, not necessarily with the primary interest of making it a place for British people to live, really to exploit the resources that the country has and capitalize, make money off of it. So Nigeria is a big country and geographically is very, very different. It is arid, dry on the north, and it is a jungle and, full of river deltas in the south. And so geographically very different. And then culturally, religiously, also very different. So the British had 2 different approaches towards how they were going to rule over Nigeria from 1860 to 1960, the 100 years that they were kind of entrenched in the country. In the South, they had a form of direct rule. They imposed their own governors, either either Nigerians themselves, but ultimately it was the British government that was in control and had direct supervision over all government positions in Nigeria. In the north, it was more indirect rule. And what that means is they looked at established governments, established leadership. It could be, tribal leaders. And what they did is they basically bribed them, paid them off to make sure that they supported certain leaders over others, to make sure that their influence was felt in that part of the country. Okay, so that sets up how you can see the current divisions exasperated, made worse in the North and the South, because they were, for 100 years handled much differently. Okay, you can also look at this next piece. I'll get back. I'll talk about that in a second. I think it's also important to understand a general concept that we talk about in comparative government, which is the idea of legitimacy. Legitimacy is the belief of the citizens that the government has the right to be the government, and there's lots of different reasons for that. Okay, so one of the reasons would be traditional legitimacy. If you look at the United Kingdom, it is just a benchmark in traditional legitimacy. The queen should be the queen because her family has been the queen for generations, right? And you can trace it back hundreds and hundreds of years. It is the government should be the government because it's always been the government. That's the idea of traditional legitimacy. Nigeria declared independence in 1960. They don't have that. They can't say, oh, well, this has always been the government. Before the British showed up, there was no Nigeria. It was just which we'll talk about in a second here, confederation of kind of tribes, ethnicities, cultures. Then you have this rational legal legitimacy. The government should be the government because it has a rational set of laws and legal codes that make sense to the citizens. Okay, that you need a rule of law, it needs to be followed, is strengthening currently, but for the majority of kind of modern Nigeria since 1960 has not been the case. Charismatic legitimacy is the belief in a single ruler because you think that person, for better or for worse, has the personality and the charisma to control and run a country. That can be good or bad. We have plenty of instances in history of people who have charismatic legitimacy and use it to inspire people, like Dr. Martin Luther King, or have charismatic legitimacy and use it just to maintain power for themselves. I think you can think of multiple examples of that. So in Nigeria, that has really bubbled up to strength. Charismatic legitimacy has bubbled up to military rule, because that is what ultimately has gained control of the country and kind of citizens. Okay. Okay. All right. So the next piece is we're going to look at how the country is, or the whole continent actually, has been divided in between. Hold on a second. The whole continent has been divided between Islam and Christianity. So if you're going to look here, all right, as I was saying, for centuries, Islam, through multiple empires, has spread from the Middle East, which is kind of up in here, down into North Africa. And really, Nigeria is the border of how far it's spread. Now, the South, Christianity was spread through colonialism. And it really, Nigeria, if you look over here at this map, is a country, is one of the few countries in the world that is kind of half majority one. It's about 50%. The population is about 50% Muslim, 50% Christian. And it's really kind of drawn through the middle where you can see that line of demarcation for religion. So that also has been pretty difficult in making a unified country. Okay. Now that is religion. Now, if you're going to look at ethnicity, there are over 250 ethnic groups that call Nigeria home. So that doesn't mean ethnic groups that, like, the United States has a lot of ethnic groups, but very few, except for, Native American cultures, are native to that land. These ethnic groups, call this home. This isn't an ethnic group that has migrated to Nigeria. These are ethnic groups that have lived there for generations and generations and generations. And there are over 250 of them, and really have been kind of thrown together by the British when they left. When the British left, actually before they left, but when they showed up, they kind of drew an arbitrary random border about where Nigeria was. And it was really to separate their property from other European countries' property. So what happened is when they drew that border, it encompassed different ethnic groups who traditionally had not shared a country. And you see that moving forward. These are the religious ethnic, these are languages spoken, okay? Again, another good way to look at it. Now, if you look here, a lot of these languages and ethnicities, they straddle the border between Cameroon and Nigeria. So these people might consider themselves a member of this ethnic language kind of group, Ful, rather than like a member of a certain country. So these allegiances and these things are not easily like defined, okay? Really important factor to look at. So let's quickly look at some comparison about ethnicity in Nigeria and problems it poses compared to ethnicity in other countries. Mexico, we've looked at ethnicity in the South. You have large groups of indigenous people, and they have the Zapatista rebellion in the early 90s is a good example of a ethnic minority trying to rebel and disrupt the current kind of state. But the problem is, as far as the Zapatistas, it was a small kind of minority of people. So it wasn't able to really gain much steam. In the United Kingdom, they have a multi-nation state. We've talked about different ethnicities that make up a single country. And for the most part, in the last 100 years at least, it has been harmonious, except for in Northern Ireland. And that is where religion plays a role, right? And so you can have different cultures, different ethnic groups, but once you bring in religion, that is typically where conflict starts to kind of bubble up. And you see that in Northern Ireland. So that's a decent kind of comparison, but it's also just a small part of a large country in the United Kingdom. In Russia, it's probably the best example about a similarity between Russia and Nigeria. Russia is lots of ethnic groups. And for the most part, the Russian government, which is, Russia's about 80% ethnically Russian, keeps these minority groups, just kind of leaves them alone. Except for in southern Russia, specifically in a region called Chechnya, where there's a group of people that are ethnically Chechen and then also a different religion than the majority of Russia. They're Muslim. And that they have been fighting wars for independence down there for decades. So this is where you see the ethnic and religious kind of overlap, and you see kind of violence bubble up and a push for separation, similar in Northern Ireland, similar in Russia, and then also similar in China, where you have this group they're called the Uyghurs. They live in the west part of the country. They're ethnically different, religiously different. Thing is, the Chinese government has such firm control over their country that, in the last 5-10 years, this group of people has been really, really locked down. So they have been pushing for independence, but then also recently been put in concentration camps. There's some horrible things. Recently, the United States labeled it a genocide, which is a heavy word to start throwing around in international, like legal circles. So that is how the Chinese government handles ethnic minorities, with religious differences and pushes for independence. In Nigeria, it's very different, because although there is no real ethnic or there is no real ethnic minority because there's so many different ethnic groups. There's no real religious minority because there's so many, it's kind of split down the middle. So this is how you can look at religion and ethnicity in other countries, but there's no real comparison, okay? So I know I'm gonna ask you to make a comparison. I would like you to explain where the comparisons, like what the similarities are and what the similarities are not, differences are, okay? All right, so what we're gonna do after we look at this kind of framework of ethnicity and religion, and religion and these differences, and then we look at the kind of legitimacy of military rule, we're gonna look at a few other ideas over the next couple days, try to fill in the blanks and connections on these pieces, okay? Hope everybody's safe, having a great day, and I'll see you when I see you. All right, bye.